Hi, I'm Galen George, and I'm an application scientist at Felix Instruments. Today we're going to be talking to you about the offset calibration process. And so I've worked to develop this protocol that customers can use to make sure that their instruments are going to read accurately to their specific fruit that they're going to be measuring. And this process involves having to destructively analyze some avocados after you've already scanned them. And what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of explain to you all the things you're going to need to perform this experiment, and then I'm going to walk you through the process. So to start off, the items that you're going to need in order to perform this experiment are the F-751 Avocado Quality Meter. You're going to need 5 avocados, and you want to make sure that these avocados are going to be directly from wherever you will be measuring. So if you're measuring in the orchard, you want to make sure that these avocados are coming directly from your orchard. If you're measuring in cold storage, you want to make sure that these avocados come from your cold storage. And if you're measuring in a lab environment like we are here today, we're going to make sure that these avocados are at room temperature. And so besides your avocados in your instrument, you're going to need some nitrile or latex gloves to follow good laboratory practices. You're also going to need a cutting board, a knife. You're going to need a coring tool, which we have here in our facility. If you have questions about it, you can always reach out to us about the coring tool. We are also going to need 2 different kinds of permanent markers. So we like to use a silver permanent marker as well as a black permanent marker for labeling. The silver one is used on the skin of the avocado because it's easier to see, and the black one is used to label our weigh boats, which takes me to the next thing that you're going to need is either a weigh boat or weigh paper, whichever one you prefer to use. Additionally, you'll want a piece of paper or a pre-printed form of some kind to record all the data that you're going to be taking today. Also, you're going to need a very critical part of this experiment, some sort of analytical balance. So here in our lab, we prefer to use an analytical balance that is shielded, that goes to 4 decimal places. But very commonly in labs, you'll find top loader balances that usually go to 2 decimal places. And that is the bare minimum that you'll want to use. If you have a top loader that only goes to 1 decimal place, you're not going to have very accurate results. So you'll want to use something that can at least go to 2 decimal places. We recommend, if you have one, to use an analytical balance that goes to 4. And then the final part of this experiment is going to require some sort of drying device. So based on whatever method that you use already in your facility, you'll want to use that same technology to dry your avocado. Here in our lab, we're going to utilize the dehydrator. Some labs might prefer to utilize the forced air oven, and others might prefer to use the microwave method. So whichever one you're already using, go ahead and use that same method so that you know your instrument is going to be performing to the same standards as your drying technique that already currently exists in your facility. So let's go ahead and get started on the actual process of recording the dry matter of these avocados and comparing it to the analytical dry matter. So what we're going to do first is we're going to grab our first avocado. I would grab your silver Sharpie, and I've already labeled this one 1, but what you're going to want to do is at the blossom end, put a label and label it fruit number 1. So you know that this is your avocado number 1. And what you're going to want to do next is, and this is kind of personal preference, but it's good practice to keep it consistent, is I will place the avocado on the lens of the F-751 dorsal side down and at the equator. So I'll align it dorsal side down at the equator like so. What you're then going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that your avocado is lined up with the top of the instrument so you're not kind of turned in any way. And you're going to want to make sure that you look down and that the lens is as covered as it can be on the instrument. From here, what you're going to do is you're going to mark that scan site. This is really important because you want to make sure that when you go to eventually take your core sample, that you're taking that core directly from the same scan site as where the instrument scanned the fruit. An easy way to mark your scan site is to kind of take your silver Sharpie and do a half moon around the fruit where the lens is. And that way, you know for sure when you go to take your core sample that you're taking it from the right location. There are other methods in which you can mark your scan site. It's mostly up to personal preference, but you want to make sure that you know exactly where that scan site was. So now that we have the scan site marked, what we're going to do is go ahead and take our scan. And when you go to take your scan, if you have the ability to, it's really important to keep it as stable as possible. So the best way to do this is to just leave it standing on a table. And when you leave it standing on the table with minimum hand interference, you just click the button and you kind of back away and you let it take its scan. And in 10 to 12 seconds, it'll give you a reading. And so in the meantime, what we're going to do next is basically just rotate this fruit and keep taking scans until we have 4 total scans. So once you hear the instrument beep a second time, you know that it's done. The screen isn't moving, it isn't changing. You know that your scan has been completed. And so what we'll do now, as I just mentioned, is I just take the fruit and I just simply rotate it 90 degrees and I place it back down at the equator. On the lens, I do my double check again to make sure that the fruit is lined up and that the lens is as covered as it can be. And then I'll once again mark my scan location. And so now I know that this is scan location B. And so now that I have that marked, what I'll do is I will go ahead and take another scan, keep my hands off of it, and then we'll get another dry matter reading for that scan site. We'll do this process 2 more times for scan site C and then another for scan site D until we have 4 equal measurements along the equator. They'll all be equidistant from each other, and it'll be a good representation of the average dry matter of that entire fruit. And so once I have the avocado completely scanned, I'll remove it. I'll make sure that my scan sites are marked A and B, just so I don't forget. And we'll proceed with the next avocado. So we have all 4 scan sites done on the first avocado. We repeat this process for each of the remaining 5 avocados. So at the end, we'll have a total of 20 scan sites because there's 4 scan sites per each avocado. And there's 5 total avocados, so we'll have 20 scan sites, which is a good enough sample size that we'll be able to accurately determine your bias or your offset. And so what we'll do now is pretend that we've gotten all 20 scan sites done. What we're going to do is move on to the actual destructive measurement part. This part, we're going to want to be extra cautious about doing it in a rapid manner, but not so rapid that we actually end up making mistakes and not being very accurate. The reason I say we need to do it kind of rapidly is because once we cut open this fruit, what's going to happen is we're exposing the flesh to the atmosphere and it's going to naturally want to dehydrate. And so you don't want to let the avocado sit out for so long that it oxidizes and dehydrates, which can affect the weight of the avocado and essentially then affect your final dry matter percentage. And so what we're going to do is do this quickly but carefully. And so we're going to first start off and weigh our weigh boats because you need to pre-weigh your weigh boats before you actually put your samples in there. And so you want to label and weigh all of these individual weigh boats. And what we're going to do then is record that on our sheet. And so then that's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We have that information already and we can move on with this process kind of seamlessly. So that is a very important step to do before actually cutting into your avocados. So we're going to start and cut the avocado in half. The way you want to do this is you don't want to cut through any of your scan sites. You want to kind of angle it so that you're cutting in between. So you have 2 scan sites per half of the avocado. So we have the 2 halves. I like to place the halves flesh side down. And then what we're going to do is remove the core. There's 2 ways to do this. One is to cut into the core itself and try to rotate it. But if you notice, like I can already notice with this core, it's a little bit soft. So what we're going to need to do is just kind of dig it out. I'm just going to use this fork and kind of dig out the seed there. So now we have 2 halves with no seed, We have our scan sites here marked. We're going to start with fruit number 1, scan site A. We're going to take the coring tool and we're going to find our scan site where that semicircle that I marked earlier with the silver Sharpie. I'm going to press in and I'm going to rotate slightly, kind of back and forth, until I penetrate all the way through to the cutting board. I remove it, and as you can see, we now have a complete core of the avocado. And then use this plunger tool that has a ring. And what this is going to do is ensure that our samples are of complete uniform width, basically. So what I'm going to do is push the plunger, and you see that's going to extend out any excess flesh. We're going to cut out that flesh. So that's to be discarded. What we're going to do now is remove the plunger. I'm going to take my finger, I'm going to poke out that core sample. I'm going to then remove the skin, because we want to remove the skin for this analysis. We just want it to be flesh dry matter, not skin and flesh dry matter. So I'll remove the skin as best as I can. And then I usually use the flat of my blade. I'll take this and I'll transfer it into the weigh boat. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to minimize the amount of handling with my hands, because I don't want to contribute to any weight gain or weight loss with oils in my fingers or removing moisture. So now that we have that sample 1, this is where we want to kind of be rapid, and we want to immediately transfer it into our analytical balance. And so I will open this up. I'll make sure the balance is tared and at 0. It was at 0 before. I put the sample in. It's really important and critical at this step to make sure that the balance has just stabilized, but don't wait too long to record that measurement, because you'll notice if you actually look at your balance that your weight is going to start to drift down, and that's because you're losing moisture to the atmosphere as it is just sitting there on the balance. And so you don't want to wait too long, but you also don't want to take the very first number you see on the scale. You got to let it stabilize first and then record. So now we're moving on to fruit 1, scan site B. And we're just going to repeat the same process that we just did. We're going to take the core sample from the exact scan site, and we're going to press it down, kind of wiggle back and forth till we feel we get to the cutting board, remove it, then use the plunger, get the excess flesh out of there, cut it off, remove the core sample, remove the skin, and then transfer it to the weigh boat that was already weighed. So we already have the empty weight of the boat, and then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to put this into the balance and weigh it in the same way that I did with the first sample. The key here is consistency, and you want to be consistent in when you take that measurement from the balance. If you're going to wait 10 seconds when you take your first sample measurement and then wait 5 seconds for the next one, that's not very consistent. You want to make sure you're doing it at the same moment every time you do your measurements. So once you've done that for all 20 samples, so all 5 fruit, all 4 scan sites, you are then ready to put them in your oven, in your dehydrator, or do your microwave method. So I'll take these 2 samples and I'm going to put them into our dehydrator. And so I'll place them in there, put the top on, and with the dehydrator method, we recommend that you do 60 to 65 degrees Celsius, which is around 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. What you'll want to do is do that temperature for, we do a minimum of 24 hours. And to ensure that these get dried as thoroughly as possible without them being burnt. So after 24 hours, what you'll do is you'll come back and you'll check on your fruit. You'll leave the dehydrator on. Choose one sample randomly out of this mix of samples. So for instance, I'm going to grab sample 1B that's been drying for 24 hours. I'm going to then put this on the balance and record that weight. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to put it right back in the dehydrator. And I'm going to let those sit for another 30 minutes. And once I've done that, I come back after 30 minutes. I will then take that exact same sample that I took earlier, so sample 1B, I'll come back and do the same thing. Grab it, out, put it on the balance, record the weight. And I will compare those two weights. If the two weights if the second weight that I took is not significantly different than the first weight, that means you can be confident that these are completely dried and they're at constant weight. And this is an important step. You don't want to assume that after 24 hours of drying that these are completely dried. You want to do a double check by taking a random sample out and seeing whether or not it is at constant weight. And so let's say, for instance, I weighed it and the weight did not change between the first time I weighed it and that second time after 30 minutes. I'm now confident that these are all pretty much dried. So I'm going to turn the dehydrator off. I'm going to remove all of my samples, all of my dried samples, and I'm going to weigh them one by one as quickly as I can while still maintaining accuracy. Why am I doing it quickly again? Because I don't want these to rehydrate. And so what you'll do is you'll just take the weight, put it on the scale, record it, and then you can discard these samples when you're done. So once you have all that data, what you're going to do is you're going to take your data sheet, your bench sheet, or just whatever piece of paper you use to write down the data, and you are going to go and input that data into our offset calibration workbook. And once you have that inputted in there, the workbook will do all the calculations necessary for you to determine your prediction correction intercept, which is what we also call the offset. And so once you have that offset determined, and you put that into your instrument will now be reading more accurately to the methods that you already were utilizing in your laboratory, in your orchard, in your cold storage facility, distribution facility, whatever. So that's been the process. That is our process for determining the offset calibration. If you have any questions about an existing instrument, about this process, please feel free to email support@felixinstruments.com. You can also check out our website. We have FAQs up there. We have multiple other resources. You can create a support ticket directly through our website. If you have questions about the instrument, if you don't have one yet and you want to know more, if you need more information, if you are interested in a price for the F-751 Avocado Quality Meter, please feel free to check out our website again or email us at sales@felixinstruments.com.